Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Monday, October the 2nd, when we talk about AMC. I think I'm going to call this video The Slumbering Giant because AMC is in a position right now where if it gets a nice move to the upside, it could signify some really big recovery type moves all the way back up to 45. We talked about possibility of getting up there quite a while ago. I'm a little more inclined to think that we might end up forming a very large bottom in this lower area. If you want to go check out some of my more recent videos, I did some macro kind of stuff. But that's not where we are yet. But I do think we're like almost there. But we're at this place right now where I believe we're ready for some continuation back to the upside. And the worst thing I can think of happening right now is we don't push out above 840, but rather reject lower and end up coming down. And even that, to me, right now, doesn't feel bad. Like, it looks pretty good. Because even though locally today we made this higher push up above the top, and then we dropped way back down, slid all the way back down through support around 785, and then filled that gap. Even though that happened, that's just a local like distribution right there. And if you look at the bigger picture, we have not made higher highs consecutively until here. So I mean, it's a signpost of, hey, we're pushing resistance, but we haven't pushed up above 845. Before that, 849. Before that, up here around 860s, and before that, up here around 9. So we really haven't been back to our top in this little range for a long time. The bottom, on the other hand, we actually did make a lower low. Right back here, we dipped right beneath, I think it's 731, and that's slightly lower than the bottom that we made on September 19th. So it acts like a bit of a spring if you consider this top area where you've got support, preliminary support right here, and then you've got the buying climax, and then, automatic reaction, and so on and so forth. It could be acting as a sort of a mini spring on this little range that's higher up. I think it's fair to say that that's likely. There's a few charts that I've got today, and I want to just kind of point out that the rotational symmetry, that bit is done. Like, I don't think it's going to go on indefinitely, and I think that it's essentially like over. But all that being said, we also did some other comparisons. We looked at a pretty decent comparison. I know some other YouTuber people were doing this comparison. I see a lot of people posting it in the Discord. I was very patient on this comparison because I believe that this green middle function was kind of more or less the one that we're actually experiencing. Was waiting for this push up and this pull back, and really had a lot to do with, hey, we need to sell off. I like the 2-hour time frame, so I was using that, and I was saying we really need to sell off and find that lower RSI, push up, and then get that retest. You can see we've kind of done it. It's got this really loose fitting, you can tell it's got this really loose fitting similarity here. Like, this is clearly more dramatic in the up and down and then the up again. But at the end of the day, you got to remember what these are, right? The RSI is doing what the price action is doing here, and the price action is pushing above a resistance, right? A creek. It's going back down and finding support, and then it's doing it again, and now it's finding support for this like secondary creek cross, right? And this is pretty normal when we're exiting any kind of an area that you would see a lot of this kind of stuff, and you just need to keep making higher lows and things like that. I wasn't positive back here on Thursday and Friday. I wasn't positive. I probably will go to my Friday video. I wasn't positive we were going to just come up and go ahead and hold, because even though this is like this kind of localized spring action here, it's very much that this could be another dive, right, for liquidity. And there's not much about this initial push that told me that wasn't possible, because that initial push had that move above, and then it comes down below, and it just kind of sat here right into Friday. And there wasn't really much to say that this morning that couldn't have just been like a UT. It went higher than the previous high, sold off, and just came right back down. Almost went back down through the creek, but it actually didn't. And that's where I think we need to kind of set up camp today is that during this push down, it got really close, and you're not going to see it on this chart. I'll move to the other chart in a minute and show you. It got pretty close, but it didn't actually break the creek. So it actually jumped up really high and it came really low. Yeah, it's at that point you're kind of like playing with fire. But if we're using these kind of as these creeks as kind of measures of whether or not we're finding that support, I think it checked the boxes. It filled the gap. It made a higher low than the previous area. So in the grand scheme of things, do I like this upthrust? No. I felt like it was really bearish looking, but it didn't have continuation. If you're going to have that double top, you should have then come back above here. I expected there to be a little bit of a pop after the gap fill. I said it on the Discord group. I said, really I'm watching that 785 level to see what happens. And you can see it pretty clearly like came back down and kissed it right there. And that's essentially like the center of our wedge. So it pushed through it, came all the way back up, came back down to it, and then it pushed up again and started making higher highs. And then by the end of the close, I think we've pushed out of both the wedges that I've been drawing. And so to me, it looks like we closed outside of it. I don't particularly like where we are. I said in the Discord group as well, this felt like the distribution zone to me, and it has a lot to do with the fact that when we came back down and pushed up, we rejected after this first push up here. This was back on Friday. We rejected at 815, and if you look back, 815 has acted as a kind of a support and resistance. This is the place where if we're going to hook, meaning like we came down, you can see it on this blue line that's coming up here. That if we came down and we were going to come up and reject, it'd probably be right here. And what you'd see is a little micro cat ear, and then it would drop, and the whole thing would end up looking like 4 different upthrusts or something like that by the end. And then you come back down. It's not out of the question yet because we have not actually come up ever above and held above 840. And 840 has been this number that we saw in the very, very beginning. I mean, some people are saying 839. I've just been saying 840 just because it's easier to say, but it has to do with this early drop back here, where you find support and then where does that supply end up starting. And 840 ends up being this very critical ceiling. And today, during that upthrust, we bonked our heads on it and came really low. But again, it's kind of like, well, what happened after that? Well, we filled the gap, and then immediately we found support above 50%. So it's looking pretty good right now. To me, it reminds me a lot of what this setup kind of is about. This was a really nice setup because you can see it crossed the moving average and then comes back and actually has a pretty clean looking hit against it. But again, remember, what is this, right? We just talked about it a minute ago. I was kind of going full circle here for a second because I wanted to present to you with this point, which is like, well, at the end of the day, like, this is kind of breaking another resistance. And if you look at where that is, we're talking about back here on January of 2023, you can see that this is sort of more or less the resistance that's being broken right here. And so as this pushed up from this first creek, right, pushes up and then pulls back, now it has a new creek. So it made a new high. You see how it pressed against it, made a new high. That's what you're seeing in the RSI, and lo and behold, just so happens the RSI down here actually went pretty high. So it looks like it's doing a pretty concise breakout and then a hold. So if we were looking at something like this and we were trying to do the comparison on the 2 hour, it's very comparable. It doesn't look quite exactly the same, but check out how that particular move, how it did what it did. And then what we could do is go back and very much like we did over here, we could look at, well, where is this? Where did the resistance push up? And in this case, we were talking about right here. We would be talking about essentially right around Friday because Thursday or Monday does push up, but it didn't really have the effect until the end of the day. So have we come above this yet? Well, that answer is no. And so when we're looking at the grand scheme of things, I'm like, yeah, it looks pretty good. When we're looking at the minutia, we're kind of just in this like holding place. We're sitting right beneath that distribution. We're sitting right beneath where I think it needs to find support and make that big push. So I'm not 100% convinced yet that this is ready to go. maybe it's more or less like this, even higher, and there's still that pullback needed. That would be like what happened right here where this pulls back down. I think we need to get that move above. And I mentioned on the Discord group that I was a little nervous about where we were because it does feel like a distribution zone. Like if you're going to reject, it'd be right here. But we just didn't lose it. Sellers did not jump on it today. They didn't really sell off very much above $8. Not to what I was expecting. It was a very clean push up. So I'm just kind of waiting. I think if we can get over 824 here, we're going to see a nice move all the way back up to the 840s. And that's where we're going to have the big, what if question. Like, because I think if we can get over that 840 region, and I was saying specifically 860 to 840, I think we're going to have a nice probable move. So here's the S&P. Had a little mini breakout here. We'll see if it holds. I'm going to jump over to this chart. This will be a pretty quick video today. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. This is one I'm using right now for creeks. I know it's confusing, or might seem a little bit confusing. This is one of the major creeks right now that I'm looking at. And again, it's essentially the same exact thing I just showed you with that RSI jump. This is on a 1 hour time frame, so it's a smaller time frame. And you can see why I think, like, okay, that could end up becoming really distributive, because if it slides back down and doesn't hold, it's bad. But if it slides down and it holds, it should be pretty strong and it should break out. I'd like to see it come above again and then come back and then go up. I think that would be a lot stronger. You can see the current trend that's holding. It's holding okay. It's doing all right. And this is the very common uptrend. We could call it the uptrend creek if you want. It's been set up every single time on these push-ups. You can see that they've kind of laid up beneath them on each move down, laid up beneath it. It's just it says 62 degrees on my my chart, but it would just depend on the scaling, right? And you can see there's another one right there, and they're laying up beneath it. So I just have that as those parallels right there, and that's kind of what I'm looking at as holding support. And I think if it breaks beneath that, it's kind of a lookout below type moment. I really do think that if we lose this particular trend right here, that we're going to see something similar to what we've seen every time, which is a pretty nasty slide back down. And so that would look like us dropping probably pretty low to like 780, hooking underneath 785, and then continuing downward. There are another set of trends that are going downward, very similar way too. Different ways to draw the same things. You can look at them as top to bottom, in this particular area, or you can do it a little bit more like a narrow. There you go. Sorry, one to the next. I like this one a little bit better. You can see that it kind of gives you a really good, strong sense of direction on each of these downward moves. I think in this case, it would be something like this, where you see how we jump the creek right there. I think it would be something where we come back down and we end up getting to the low and possibly even a spring via this arc. So you jump above, you basically probably would be maybe one more push up for a UTAD and then a drop, or it would just flat out drop from here, I guess. It's possible. And then you'd end up coming way back down. So these are like ways for us to understand potentially, right, what's going on with this price action. And I know you're going to notice what I'm seeing here, and that is this guy. So there's this kind of longer formed cross here on this M, and I think it signifies something pretty important, because the bottoms here were going up until here. So you have like a higher support, and then a drop. Now there are these parallels that I've got going up, and that certainly would aid in us getting up to like 9, coming back down, catching on that EMA, and then pushing up again. But I also think that there's kind of a steeper one at play, because if you map out especially what you saw today, comparing it to what we saw on Friday, those two tops, it actually creates a sort of a slice right through it. And we've checked this before. We checked it back on Wednesday, and then previously before that, we checked it on the Monday. And then there is even a sense that we gained support on that. So I think it's a very large cross trend, and I think it's important that we get back up above it. And I'm watching that really carefully, because today, if you were paying attention, I know you guys are like, man, there's a lot going on right now. You're going all over the place. Yeah, I am, because there's a lot to look at. Really just focusing on RSI on different time frames, focusing on how it's building out within the range, where we are and all that. As some of you who are keen probably would have been noticing that today we actually seem to be forming a downtrend, but if you notice the top, it actually is, it's kind of presenting itself as a widening, right? So we're creating like a widening right here. Breaking that to the upside could be really, really strong. But let me tell you, if it pushes up here and it goes up to like, let's say 850 and then redistributes down, well, that could be really, really weak because you could end up with a pretty ridiculous slide down, you know what I mean, on this kind of a widening structure. So do I think that's what's going to happen? I don't know. I said today that I thought that it looked kind of weak at first, this push up this morning, and then it was weak. It came back down. But I posted some bearish stuff because I was thinking, well, if it loses this 785 and stays underneath it, it's going to drop. You know, this is just going to look like a flush with a nosedive to go down for a spring. Instead, it held pretty strong. So is this something that's, you know, going to last? I don't know. It could be on the verge of a breakout. You know what I mean? Like it's right there at that level that it needs to be at. So it just needs to get that push. And I think if it can do it, we're gonna test that 840 up to 860 area, and that's really where we need to see support now. All right, and then the last chart, this is more of like a nitty-gritty chart. So I've been using this chart for trading, so it's a bit of a mess. But this is one that you can kind of see some other stuff on as well. So you can see this is where the gap was, and we filled it. Hang on a second. Hold on just a second. I want you to notice that like the similarity in this particular bottom setup, they're all really, really similar. And if you look at this right here and compare it to the setup here, it's really similar, right? You came down, it was like a double top. You came down and you retested 790s, There's a hook, a drop, a pump up. There's a hook, a drop, pump up. There's another drop down, and then you form those little cat ears. And I looked at that up close today, and instead of distributing down right here, back down through, it found support and pushed back up high. Now, that doesn't mean you're out of the woods. I'm just saying, like, that's a good sign because the prevailing shape here to me is that M jump, that push up, find resistance, pull back, push up, and you can see the overall shape. And I know you guys are like, well, you talk about these M shapes like a lot. Well, remember, they're sine waves. It's kind of like up, down, up, down. It's all that is. So yeah, there's like a pretty clear M right there, but there's a bigger one at play right here. So my expectation isn't necessarily, and I think it was over on this pullback. I think that was the main cross right there. And when I look at this, I'm thinking, well, it definitely feels stronger than the last time we jumped up and came above 789. Oddly though, RSI, it's a bit higher, you know, and you can see how this was low and then this is a bit higher. That's not actually a great sign because we're making lower tops here, but we're getting more overbought, and that's typically bearish. That being said, you know, I usually am doing this as like a 5 or 6 minute time frame. We could push it up to 15, and it may not be as intense. So for now, it's a bit of a mixed signal, you know, and I think it's kind of like where I'm at right now. I don't want to give people any false sense that, oh, it has to do this or it has to do that. I'm not tracking a fractal one-to-one here. I'm just looking at this like any old range, and we've seen that sometimes when it gets to the end here of a range, it'll chop for several days and then go up. Sometimes it gets to the end of the range, you get this really simple push up to the upside, and then it distributes, and it's a UT, you know. And I'm not going to hold my breath and say that it has to do something. I am liking right now, golly, this thing is like chopping super slow. Come on. It's like scaling it. It's really annoying. I don't know what happened. I like lost my chart. Yeah, I am liking right now that it pushed above this particular downtrend because I think this is one of the macro cat ear lines. I don't want to get too much into that, but if it can hold support above it, it could be really strong. again, like we had this really strong deviation this morning on RSI on like the 15-minute. You can see it. We made a higher top, lower RSI. RSI was already turning down. Volume was way lower on that second top as well. So everything kind of about that didn't really sit too great, but then it came back up and held. So I don't know, unless it's just floating on fumes here. It's just throwing out a lot of different signals, and I think it's kind of obscuring, maybe is the right word. Could it be that we're still experiencing this kind of push-up and that we're still going to get this pullback? Yeah, but I guess the way that it's setting up right now makes me wonder if that pullback is going to come down as far, even if it did come down Tuesday into Wednesday or something like that. It just doesn't necessarily, to me right now, look like it's going to. So I have a lot going on here. I know it's a little bit confusing. Again, I'm using this kind of like actively trading. I think if it comes back down, we might see it slide low, but it makes me question whether or not we actually make a new low and whether or not we just pull back and find support again, maybe around 650. So here's the thing, okay? 21 minutes, kind of been a little bit of me yammering on about different stuff. There's a lot to talk about here, okay? And I could go into some bigger picture stuff. I don't really want to do that right now. I think this is going to be a good week. It's going to be a week to trade no matter what happens, up or down. But I think that there's a strong sense of like, it's sort of finishing, you know what I mean? There is a lot of liquid that's left on the table, especially below 770. And I'm wondering if we're going to try to make that drive down to go get it. I still don't think it's out of the question, but we are really close right now, I think, to a potential breakout to push up and get to that 840 level and push out. And we've tested it multiple times. I think if we get up there again, it's probably going to break. And once it breaks and we hold above it, we should see a huge amount of buy-in. That should be the moment that's really obvious, like, okay, we're moving. We haven't seen that just yet, so I'm not of the opinion that smart money is really interested just yet. Like, I think there's some people buying, but I also think there's plenty selling, and I'm wondering if they're kind of waiting for news or waiting for SPY to do something, the market on the whole. I'm not sure, so can't give you that answer, but it just feels like, all right, either we're chopping along this top so that we're going to distribute and slide down to get to this lower liquidity, or we're about to break out. Like, it's that simple for me. And it to me, on the big picture, it looks pretty strong. So that's all I got for you today. I'm just kind of waiting in the wings here. I know that's not probably what you wanted to hear from me. Is like, oh, here it's going to happen. But it's straightforward. You come up to this area above 840 and you SOS or you UT. You SOS or you create an upthrust. Like, that's it. I mean, it's that simple. And today we bonked our heads on 839. If we come up there again with some strength and hold above it, you should see that big buy-in. And if you don't, and then you start seeing it slide back through these supports, that's when you got to kind of be weary, like, okay, well, this could not be working out for us. So just be careful, okay? And then if it had come down here instead, if it had rejected and come down, I would have been just as comfortable saying that I'm pretty bullish, because I still think this range is formed out okay, and I don't really mind the idea of coming low for a last bit liquidity grab, especially if on those higher time frames we get that RSI to come down a bit lower. So I guess we'll find out soon enough. I think that, again, we're pretty darn close. If we have another day of another pullback with some support and then a push back up to that 840 area, it should be good to go. All right, that's all I got. Know it was a lot. Know I was rambling a little bit, but that's what you get tonight. So hope you guys have a good one. I'll talk to you later.